Imagine working a job where people are on the edge of their seats from the moment you walk in. A profession of collaboration that is often perceived as criticism. Well, today I'm going to talk about a field that is hated by many and provide a perspective from someone who's done the work in that field. So let's get into it. Welcome back to my channel, everybody. This is Jonesia from QA. If you're new here, my name is Imani, and I discuss topics ranging from quality to education to career. So if any of that seems of interest to you, hit that subscribe button and I can provide you more content like that. So once upon a time, I was looking for a change of scenery professionally. I was given the opportunity to practice something that I was honestly terrified to do. This is because of the reputation that comes with this kind of work. When I mentioned what I did to my loved ones, they often cringed and said that they hated that department at their job because nobody wants to hear about themselves. But anyway, I was told to prepare questions, and I wasn't really sure what to expect because I had never done this before, of course. So after doing it a few times and getting a little bit more comfortable, I ultimately decided to apply for an open position that was at my company. And from there, I became an auditor. Yes, auditing, a field that is loathed by many in a variety of industries. And I get it, it's not fun being in the hot seat. But I will say it is worse being in an inspection when there were things that could have been discovered and worked on through the audit or from a monitoring visit. I'll get more into that in another video. So I think it's important to discuss what you may think an auditor behaves like versus what I've seen as someone who's done auditing work. Now, I'm not speaking for all auditors because clearly there are different people in every field that might have different temperaments, might have different outlooks in life. There are plenty of people who are bullies who go into particular fields and abuse that authority. I'm not denying that in the auditing field. However, I will say how my experience was. I have different thoughts on it. So the stereotypical auditor is probably seen as a bully, someone who is very high-strung, very anal retentive, very much like every single thing they're going to investigate, they're going to ask questions about. And part of that is true. You know, being an auditor, you're going to ask questions. That's the whole point in it, is to find out as much information as possible to make an assessment that's going to ultimately help the auditee. Now, the kind of auditors that I worked with, they were very kind people. My whole quality department in general was very friendly. If you needed help with something, you could ask them questions. They were all really lovely people. The auditors that I worked with were focused on collaboration. They weren't focused on picking people apart, more so than trying to provide constructive criticism that can help them improve moving forward. My experience as an auditor was actually pretty chill. Of course, there were times where things were more stressful, but I was usually in preparation. But to anyone who's interested in entering the field, I do have a few things I'd like to say because there are just some things you're gonna have to expect because of the reputation that some people have placed on auditing. So the first thing is expect the hate. Most people aren't gonna like you. Nobody likes audits. I think that when people take it personally, they lose sight of what the overall picture is. In clinical research, you have auditing to detect any issues in your processes, your procedures, your documentation. The whole purpose is to make sure that everything is being followed the way is needed to ensure human subject protection ultimately. You don't want a vaccine to go out and there were small errors in how it was conducted, preparing it. And next thing you know, you have a medication, let's say Ozempic, for example, that is actually not viable because it wasn't stored properly, or there were improper dosages taken. Like, tracking these things are so important to make sure that you and me are safe. So when it comes to clinical research, it's very important with the clinical trials specifically to make sure that we're detecting any fallacies or any inconsistencies to ensure that the highest quality product is provided to you as the consumer. a really big thing that I will recommend to anyone who's considering auditing is to work on your time management skills if those are lacking. Auditing, it has high periods and low periods, but it also depends on what kind of organization you work for. Because I know at the CRO, clinical research organization that I worked at, we had audits. Sometimes it would be a few a month, and other times you might have like 4 back to back. It all depends. And I know that there are some places that have audits every week or a couple times a week, I think I've even seen. So it all depends on what company you're working for. But yeah, honestly, the preparation, and I think it also depends on how in depth the company goes, because I know that there have been situations where um, I think it's like light auditing, just going over a checklist of basic things versus going into the documentation and picking it apart essentially, and not in a bad way, because that sounds bad, but just dissecting everything, making sure, okay, are you still using this spreadsheet? Are you still utilizing this? Are you still doing X, Y, and Z? Making sure that everything is the same, because you want to make sure there's consistency. You don't want that inconsistency. And if there are changes, you want to make sure they're reflected so that the next person who's following that SOP, standard operating procedure, or that work instruction, make sure that they are aware of what they're looking at. And so that the trainings that come with these procedures, you want to make sure that people are able to follow along and that they're doing things the right way. Because with work instructions, sometimes you're thrown in and, you don't really know what you're doing, and you're following these as your quote unquote Bible, or this is what you have to follow essentially to make sure that you're doing things the right way, especially when it comes to safety and pharmacovigilance. They have to follow specific safety procedures, like in laboratories and stuff like that, so that they aren't overdosing, or so that they aren't experimenting with things in a way that are going to be detrimental to their well-being, the staff in the laboratory's well-being, and ultimately the consumer's well-being. So there are just so many facets to quality. From a very integral level, you want to make sure that your procedures are in line. You want to make sure that everything is the way that it needs to be, so that there are no deviations from that. And by deviation, I mean anything stepping away from the way that things are lined up. That's what a deviation is. Ultimately, the objective is to collaborate with the auditee. It's not something where we hate you and we're going against you. No, 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 no. At least it shouldn't be like that. Again, I can't speak for all auditors. I know that some people are more intense than others. Ultimately, it comes from a place of respect for the auditee. Things should be professional. Things should be objective. You don't want a whole lot of fluff when it comes to auditors, because we want to get into the meat and potatoes of the situation. We're not trying to just hear fluff. We're not trying to hear excuses. Just be straight up with us so that we can be straight up with you and help you so that you can do better next time. So from my experience, the internal audits were a little bit more laid back. And by laid back, I mean there wasn't a whole lot of tension, because usually these were done on a quarterly basis, annual basis, semi-annually. It just depended. And usually those heads of those departments or managers, they were aware of what they were getting into. And it usually just went pretty smoothly. There was no animosity, and they knew our quality department, at least internally, of course. There's some comfort with that, at least at my CRO. I can't speak for every organization, but that much I can say as far as internal audits. Now, external audits, that's where you don't know what you're going to get. Of course, we, as the auditors, when I was an auditor, the team, we'd be very professional. We would be objective. We wouldn't be rude. We're on our best behavior to make sure that we're we're all on the same page. We want to let them know that we're here from a collaborative standpoint. And that was something that I really admired about the auditors that I worked with, because they took their job very seriously. They made sure that it was a warm environment in the sense of like, hey, we're in this together. This is a tool. This is not us trying to torture you or make your life horrible. So that was something that I really respected about the people that I was working with. Now, what I have seen as far as external audits, um, people are on edge. Like I was saying in the beginning, they are grinning and bearing, and they are probably wanting to cuss us out from behind closed doors because they just are not happy to have us there. And, and I get it. They don't want to hear what we have to say, even though it's going to help them in the long run. It's kind of like parenting. When you're being an effective parent, you're not always going to give your kids like the cookies or whatever they want. Sometimes you've got to say, no, this is what you need to hear, and I'm not going to sugarcoat it for you. And some people just don't like that with auditors, and that's okay. But I think that when you are in clinical research and you're going to be participating in these trials and working on these vaccines or these investigational products, it's important to have thick skin. It's important to be objective and be able to take constructive criticism so that you don't hurt anybody. There is this one instance. It was like my last audit, I think, for my CRO. Of course, the person I was working with, we were very professional. We were very respectful. We weren't there to be rude. We were just, being objective and being, how we are in our department. What I did see was that there was this one person who was not about the audit. This was a remote audit, so we were depending on what they could show us, what documentation they could provide, and stuff like that, of course. But one of the things that we do for external audits or on-site audits, or in this case, it was a situation where they didn't do on-site, so you go along with that. We needed them to show us a patient waiting room, and this one person did not want to show that. They were very much against it. They were like, "Oh, we don't show this," or something, and it was pulling teeth to get them to show us what we needed to see for us to know what we needed to know. And they ended up having a major attitude the whole time. And they were very nasty, very rude, and stuff like that. If you're auditing someone and they're just very nasty to you, don't be surprised if that's noted, that the decorum at the site is not great, because you can't do that. You can, but you'll have to deal with the repercussions of that. So yeah, that was probably one of the most intense things I saw. I know I heard stories from some of the auditors I worked for, and I know some of them went to countries where the women couldn't do the auditing, so it had to be on the men, and the women, they just remained silent, not to insult the culture and stuff like that. And it is not for the faint of heart. It is not. Again, I didn't even have horrible experiences, but just from the stories I was told, I was just like, oh my gosh. Like, I would not want to go through that. So yeah, there are friendly auditors, there are friendly auditees, there are not so friendly auditors, there are not so friendly auditees. My point of this video is that it's not all that it seems. It's not always going to be a horrible auditor. Sometimes it's not always going to be a great person who's being audited. What matters is that there is professionalism no matter what. So all in all, I want that to be the takeaway, that not every auditor is out against you, and that the compliance department is very important. So overall, those are my thoughts, and I hope that you all got something from this. I hope that this was educational, and I hope that the next time someone says they're an auditor or you have an audit, go into it with a positive mindset. Yes, by the end of it, there are going to be deliverables that are needed. I know that from my experience, usually there would be some action items that would be needed on the site's part who is being audited. There's a specific timeline for those things. And by the time the next audit happens, it is expected that those items are taken care of, or if not, that there's a note to file or some sort of reference point saying, okay, we're actually going to need this extended or something like that, to make sure that things are taken care of. Just having a good excuse by the time that next audit comes, making sure you're very upfront with things like, okay, we've been working on this, but we do need an extension. So yeah, I think that that's everything that I want to cover for this video. Let me know below. Would you ever consider a career in auditing? Do you think that all auditors are the devil? Do you think that auditees should have it easy? Let me know your thoughts on this video, because I am curious if anyone has had experiences that are crazy with auditors or with the auditees, whoever might be getting this video. So yeah, that's everything, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Bye.